Hello everybody. My name is Garrett Price and I'm with Heart and Home Hospice and Palliative Care. I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself as I get going because I feel like that's an important piece when we start to talk about mental health issues in the world. So in my adult life, I've had a number of different professions. I've been a minister for a while, then I was retrained into a chaplain, and eventually I was a manager in the healthcare industry until I retrained as a clinical health counselor. And that's what I want to talk about with you today, because we've been through something, y'all. We've gone through a drastic change when COVID came into our world. And that's done things to us. And so today I want to talk to you about building grit in the time of COVID. So building grit in the time of COVID. The obvious question is, what is grit? I think that we all have a sense of what this idea is. But that's where I'm going to start. I'm going to start by talking about what is grit. I'm going to talk a little bit about how we have been affected and effected as we've gone through this transition from a world that we used to live in into now the world with COVID. And then I want to talk a little bit about how we can be intentional in building grit inside of ourselves. So what is grit? Well, grit is a personal characteristic. And what's great about that is it means that anybody is able to build it and to grow it as part of who we are. When we really think about a definition of grit, we're talking about passion and persistence over a long period of time focused on a particular goal. So I'm going to say that whole piece again. Passion, persistence over a long period of time focused at a goal. Now, when we've studied grit and what it means and the implications for grit in our life, we can see that grit is a primary component for those people that are able to make it in their life journeys. That means, so if you think about a major executive and a person who's been able to go through difficult experiences to get to where they want to be in life, they have had grit. And when we look at all the different pieces that goes into making a person successful, we can see that grit is actually like the primary piece that actually gets a person there. It's this ability to have passion and persistence over a long period of time focused on a goal. So what are the qualities of grit then? If that's kind of what grit is, how do we really kind of identify it? So the first kind of quality for grit is value and meaning directed action. So value and meaning directed action. We all have a sense of our own values, but are we actually connected to them? And are we actually living connected to those values on a day-to-day basis? Are we kind of aware enough in a particular moment to go, my value is kindness, and how would kindness have me act in this moment? So that's one of the first components. Second one is goal focused on a life worth living. So for people that have grit, they do have a sense of this kind of V-shaped choice. And this choice is, they always have the sense that I, in this moment, can choose to take a step towards my life worth living or a step away from my life worth living. And that choice is always presented to them in almost every moment of life. In this moment as I'm sitting with you, or this moment as I'm at the counter ordering my coffee, how am I going to act? And is it going to take me towards that life worth living or away from that life worth living? Then another component inside of grit is what we call a growth mindset. An example of what a growth mindset is let's say that something comes into your life today that challenges you. And when we're in a growth mindset, we look at that thing and we have this kind of presence of, isn't that cool? And we are open to it, we welcome it because we see it as a challenge, as something to overcome, and ultimately it's something to help me grow. And when we have a growth mindset, that's what everything is in life. Anything that comes along that challenges us, we take it on with a sense of, this is going to make me into something. When you have a growth mindset, you welcome what's difficult and you take it on knowing that it's going to make you even better. Then with grit also, there is this, what I like to say is like a preference for the positive. Now, the human mind is a really interesting machine. it's fantastic, and it is so incredibly helpful. But it is biased towards the negative. And when you think about survival in the world, that is so deeply helpful, because you're going to be able to see the threat instantly, because it helps you connect to that threat instantaneously. But in order to connect to something positive, your mind literally needs about 20 seconds. And I just want to give you a sense of how long that is for a moment. So 20 seconds. That 20 seconds is how long it takes for your mind to connect to something positive. Now, if you actually do take that 20 seconds, something very interesting happens in your brain. You start to form new neural networks to where when positivity comes along the next time, your mind does respond just a little bit quicker. Isn't that interesting? So, a person with grit is not only a person that is positively focused in life, but they're able to connect to the positive things that happen in their life in such a way that they take a moment to feel them. So this is something I do try to practice as I try to build my own grit. So like this morning, when my daughter comes to me and she tells me it's time to go to school, I take a moment and I just look at her, and I notice the way she's done her hair. I notice the way she's dressed. I notice how she has set herself up to live in the world today. And I take a moment to feel my pride in her and really, really feel it. So preference the positive. The next part about grit, somebody that has grit, a characteristic of grit, is mindfulness. Mindfulness in our world is very popular, and it means just a wide, it's very broad. So it can be anything from like spirituality to yoga to fill in the blank. When I'm talking about mindfulness, I like to think about it as a non-judgmental presence, a way of being present in life, where you are noticing that you're having thoughts instead of being owned by every thought you have. You are noticing that you're having feelings, again, instead of being owned by every feeling you have. When you're on autopilot and you're just being had by thoughts, being had by feelings, that's going to drive your behavior in a way that you're not going to intend. Because again, because of the negativity bias that happens inside of your brain, when we get hooked into thoughts, when thoughts start having us, when emotions start having us, our behavior becomes about avoiding negative emotions and avoiding negative thoughts. And that behavior can become addictive because we start to numb in certain ways. We start to use media. We start consume and overconsume media. And it actually disconnects you from that life worth living. So this mindfulness is being able to be present in the moment, noticing the thoughts that I have without judgment. I had a thought about running this person off the road. I just notice that thought and I let it be there, but it doesn't have me. I have it. I notice that I'm anxious. Even in this moment as I'm talking, I feel anxiety, but I don't let it own me. I don't let it take my life over. I kind of turn it into just the facts, if you will. I notice where it is in my body. I notice what it feels like, but then I stay connected to my values and I take action and continue to talk with you. The last component here for a person with grit is self-acceptance. And what we mean by that is not that you have great self-esteem. That's wonderful. Self-esteem is fantastic. But more that I can accept myself in the moment as this thing is happening. So as I'm here right now talking to you, I'm noticing that at times I don't say all the right words. I'm noticing that I'm having thoughts that are kind of strange and they're judgmental. And the whole time I'm just going, okay, these things are here, right? It doesn't make me a bad person. It actually makes me human. And I can just accept them and let them be there. So the next time I make a mistake, I can go like, oh, yeah, I just made that mistake. And because I have a growth mindset, I'm able to sit with that mistake and go like, this is what I can learn of it. And I don't have to get caught into this narrative that starts to beat myself up about how terrible I am. How could I make that mistake? How worthless I am. So again, these are all the kind of qualities that we can see in a person who has grit. Now, the truth is, we all need grit right now. We all need to have the capacity to be passionately connected to those things that are meaningful for us, even while things are difficult, meaning that we have to stay connected. We have to have that persistence to keep moving forward right now. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how we've been affected by SARS-CoV-2 and what it's done to us and what it is doing to us. I do this because this is an awareness piece, and everybody should have a sense of it, because when you become aware of something, then you can start to do something about it. So here's what we're seeing right now. This is the way that our life has been made strange, right? And I'm going to talk about it in kind of three major elements that are making our life strange right now. The first one is SARS-CoV-2 or COVID-19, right? So COVID-19 entered our world. Our lives went into a strange pattern. And a common piece of this pattern for many people is increased isolation and loneliness. We were asked to isolate into our homes. We were asked to decrease our connection to family, to faith groups, and all these others. And this started many months ago, and it's continuing to this day. And so we do see this kind of increase in isolation. Now, along with that, we've seen a significant increase in depression and anxiety and suicidal ideation and self-harming. And I don't want to be an alarmist, but this is like more than a 20% raise over this period of time, which is significant. And sadly, here in the States, we've had an epidemic of depression and anxiety and suicidal ideation that predates COVID. So this event has come in and it's increased this. It's made this worse. Another piece that's happened then for many of us is we've lost what I like to call our assumptive world. So what's the assumptive world? When I wake up in the morning, I make certain assumptions about my life and what's going to be in my life. I assume that my family's going to be there. I assume that my job is going to be there. I assume that my access to food and to healthcare and all of these pieces are going to be there because they were there yesterday. But almost in a moment, many people went through a loss of that assumptive world, or at least a drastic change of that assumptive world. Now, these three components I just talked about, isolation, increase in mental health issues, and loss of assumptive world, these are all components in what we call complicated grief in the mental health world. And so all of us have gone through some sort of very complicated grief process, and we still are going through that grief process. And so that's just that first moment of awareness to know that you're grieving and that I'm grieving. What does that mean? That means so many things. That we're going to have this kind of ebb and flow experience in our life right now, where we flow into life and we start to get excited about how things are going forward and what life is going to become. And then we ebb back into these emotions of sadness or anger or denial or frustration. And this can feel like you're a little crazy. And so this is the thing that's happening in us. It's happening in our children. It's happening in my children. It's happening in your children. It's happening in me. It's happening in you. It's happening in those people that are aging right now in our world. Because of where we are, we have all been challenged to regulate our emotions. And I laugh about that because I know if you're like me, you're just a little more on edge. And when you're in the grocery store or when you're in line to get whatever it might be that day, you can just kind of feel that on edgeness. It's just a little closer than it was before. And if you want more information on this, I just encourage you to go to the Mental Health of America website. There's a lot of statistics on how SARS-CoV-2 has affected us this way. So we're all grieving is the first thing that COVID has done to us. The second thing that's happened is because we're so isolated and because we're so alone, I don't have my cell phone on me, which is crazy, but our connection to our devices has increased. And inside of that device, particularly, most of us have upped the percentage of time we spend on social media. It's all you might be on social media right now watching this, right? So let's all just take a moment to be honest about that. Now, there are beautiful parts about that. Social media can be a way of feeling connected And connection is a remedy to grief. And so that's what we're seeking as we get on to these things. Right? So we're seeking that increase of belonging and connection. But social media uses an algorithm, which I'm sure everybody's aware of. Now, this algorithm, though, is a little sadistic in that it seeks to understand what your biases are. And because it gets money for keeping your eyeballs on it, it uses your bias to actually kind of feed you a little bit more and a little bit more of that same bias, and it grows it and it makes it stronger. And what we're seeing with this algorithm as we've studied it is that that is a recipe for radicalization, right? To where we start to move into this place where we feel 100% certain about all of our opinions. And that 100% certainty leaves no room for any kind of nuance or conversation with another person. And so one of the things that's happening because of this social media is that as we kind of move down these paths of increased radicalization, we are becoming increasingly rigid in our views, to where we lack empathy when we meet another person who might have an alternative view to ours. And this is happening across the spectrum. And I think we all can kind of feel it. So whether you're left wing or right wing, this is something that's happening to all of us. Now, this is not going to radicalize us to the point where we will become dangerous in the world, but it will be difficult to all of our relationships. And so if we are already living in a place where we're increasingly isolated, and then we are using something we're using something to help us decrease that isolation, but that thing actually is increasing our isolation, it's something that's significantly adding to the problem. And so the third thing that's happening right now is tribalism. So because of this increased isolation where we are becoming increasingly rigid in our views, we are turning into people that can name our in-group. I am A, and I accept A. But B, I am not, and I don't accept B. And tribalism actually is not a terrible thing. It's helpful. If you would ask me what sport team I follow, for instance, I follow the Portland Timbers. That's tribalism. And we get connection out of that. Again, so you can see why we're driven towards it, because it gives us a sense of belonging, connection, of safety, and all these things. But when it becomes kind of a little more extreme, a little more rigid, what happens is that it becomes about in-group and out-group. And anybody who's part of my in-group, I'm able to extend compassion and empathy towards. I want to understand them. But anybody who's in my out-group, I simply can't understand them. And that's because there's something, again, interesting that happens inside of our brain, that we are identifying them as a threat. And because they're a threat, we only have a couple of options with them. Either we have to convert them into A, or we have to destroy them. And it's a difficult thing that's happening right now. And so these are kind of the things that are happening. And as I've talked about them, I'm guessing that you can feel some of their truth inside of your own neurobiology. You've had certain reactions to this. And so I'm not really here to talk about where you land on any type of spectrum right now, but rather to help you know that this is part of what we're all experiencing. And as we experience it, if we're aware of it, we can actually do something about it, right? And that is where grit comes back in to this conversation. I said before, we need grit to get through this. And we also need grit to come back to each other, right? So let me talk a little bit about that. Let's get gritty. The answer to the world made strange is to develop grit. So I talked about the qualities of grit a little bit earlier, but I'm going to bring them back into this moment with you. If you need to start developing grit to help you deal with your grief, to help you combat what social media is doing to you, and to help you to move back towards empathy and nuance when it comes to relationships. This is how you do it. Start with your values. What are they? Can you name them? Do you really know what they are? For me, I keep in my wallet, I won't pull it out, but I do keep in my wallet what I call my True North card. And this is a place where I've just taken the time to write down at least 4 of my values. I know the 3 that I have on it right now are kindness, trust, and gratitude. And I use these readily throughout my day. And it is so helpful because it gives me a sense whenever I'm kind of in the moment of where now my emotions are running wild, my thoughts are running wild, I'm feeling lost in the world, I'm not certain about the next thing. I can simply turn to that card and go, trust, kindness, gratitude. And then I just choose one. I choose trust. For me, I'm a person of faith. And so when I think about trust, I am thinking about a compassionate universe that is there to take care of us and that I can give myself to that and trust it. A good friend of mine uses this idea that we are simply a leaf in a stream, and that stream is carrying us, and we can trust the flow of that stream. And that helps me just to get a sense of grounding again. Okay, so now even this I can go through. Or gratitude. Gratitude is one that's so simple. We know we can study this and we can see the markers. If you simply name 3 things you have gratitude for 3 times a day, that alone will increase your connectedness to happiness by 30%. And who wouldn't want 30% more happiness? So knowing your values, right? And then once you have them, how do you actually take meaningful action connecting to those values? I talked about that V shape, towards or away. This is how you make this choice. In this moment, when you're about to act and you have your values in front of you, kindness, trust, and gratitude, and you're met with somebody who is yelling at you because you cut them off in traffic, this will help you make that choice. I'm going to choose kindness in this moment. And kindness says, yeah, man, I'm so sorry I was distracted. I'm so sorry I did that. I hope you have a better day, right? And we step into our world. We continue to live it. So that was a little bit about value, meaning, direction. And let me say just a little bit more. For many of us, when we're going through these emotions and we're so isolated, we start to believe that we are alone. You're not. All of us are having the same experience. And one value you might bring into this is simply hope. And you might add it right into this and put that on your True North card. And then think about how you can take action out of hope. What would that be? What would that behavior be? And just make that something you routine into your life. Goals focused on a life worth living. When I think about my own self, and when I think about what is a life worth living right now, even when things might be strange, for me, it's really just back to the basics. Connection with my wife, connection with my children. I have the opportunity on 2 days a week, 1 week, or 3 days a week the next week to have my children in my home where I'm also trying to work. And while that's happening, it's very, very easy because, again, this negative bias in my brain to just see how this is a pain, to see how this is a problem, to see how this is horrible, to see how I am powerless in this moment. But if I can connect again to my life worth living through my values and the actions that I'm taking, and if it's kindness, I'm connecting to my girls, I start to see that this is also opportunity. When again will you be privileged with this much time to be with them, to see them, to connect to them, to teach them? And when you start to see it that way, it's the life worth living in this moment. What happens? At lunchtime, maybe it's family PE, and we all go for a hike or a walk or whatever that might be. But it's that connection again to goals focused on a life worth living. So I'm not going to actually make goals out of it. My goals this week are to see my children every time I see them. My goal is to compliment my wife as often as I can. They don't need to be elaborate or like too far into the future. They can be immediate, but then to have some future ones too. I'd like to lose 5 pounds, right? And so we put those out there and we go for them because your life is now. It's what's happening right now. And so having goals that point you towards your life worth living is a way that you can increase your grit. A growth mindset. I just want all of us to put this on for a moment. Let's just put on a growth mindset. A growth mindset says that this thing that's happening right now is for my benefit. And how can you put that on? How could you put on the difficulties in our world, whatever they might be, and say, this is for my benefit, this is for our benefit? Because it puts you in a different place. Then you start to see more of those opportunities. You could see how, oh man, this is for our benefit. This is going to make us stronger. Then prioritize the positive. And I'm going to give you this exercise. You will all start to try it a little bit. Savor the positive. So what does that mean? That means when the next positive thing happens, whatever it might be, it could be as simple as I'm obviously being a little transparent here, as simple as the sip of your next cup of coffee, and to taste it, and to feel its warmth, and to notice all of its qualities, and to just really savor it. Notice how I am starting to feel in my own body as I'm drinking this. Or when I come home later today and I see my wife again, I just see her. And I notice her completely in her beauty. And I just savor her. And I take the moment to notice how that makes me feel in my body. That is the recipe for growing new neural networks in your brain. Positivity networks. Right? Mindfulness then. Build some practices that have to do with noticing your thoughts instead of just letting your thoughts have you throughout the day. Right? So here's a very simple thing you can try as you're just aware of it. So start to notice what it's like to have a thought. I know that's weird, right? But what is it like? What's the experience of having a thought? Is it a voice in your head? What is that like? Start to play with the way the thought is speaking in your head, because you can hear it, right? It's almost as if it's there. So instead of just letting it run, start to notice the thought was, I'm not doing so great at this right now, right? But then put something on it like this. I'm having the thought that I'm not doing so great right now. It's so subtle, but a significant difference, because it helps you to understand that your thoughts are not true. They're thoughts. They can be flawed. They can be illogical, right? And it helps you to be a person that has their thoughts instead of being the person that is had by their thoughts. So mindfulness also can extend to just being in the present moment. Whenever you are feeling too overwhelmed, one thing you can simply do is to ground yourself right here, right now. Feel your feet on the ground. Notice what that feels like. Feel your hands. Notice what it feels like that your hands are moving. Notice your breath. What does it feel like to breathe? Right? When I work with somebody with depression or anxiety, this is something that I have them do all the time. Ground themselves in the moment. And instead of telling a story of what's happening right now, that I'm in danger or this thing is happening or I've just messed up or whatever the story might be, not the story, just the facts. I am in a room. This room has a couch. I have a sensation in my stomach. I feel tight in my shoulders. Whatever it might be, just ground into this moment. Take the story out of it and get to just the facts. And then for all of us, self-acceptance. Right? Nobody ever told you that you have to do it all. Well, maybe somebody did, but I guess I'm saying to you, you don't have to do it all. There's no need for you to be perfect. You are enough. And when you get to that place where you can accept yourself that you are enough, then your mistakes are teachers. Because we're on a path to getting better, all of us. And on that path, I hope that you can use some of these to grow your own grit and to increase your connection to your life worth living, even when things are hard. Thank you.